What was life actually like before fire existed? Not romantic. Not peaceful. Genuinely terrifying. Picture complete darkness, every single night, for your entire life, with absolutely no way to push it back. No light to see a predator's eyes before it was already too late. No warmth to survive a freezing night. Just black, endless darkness, and whatever was waiting inside it. Early humans lived exposed to this darkness, completely unprotected, huddled together in the open, listening helplessly for sounds they couldn't identify and couldn't see coming. Predators hunted freely after sunset, and humans, without claws, without fangs, without fur thick enough to survive, real cold, were remarkably vulnerable prey. Every single night was a gamble simply to survive until morning. And it wasn't just the darkness. Food had to be eaten raw, tough, difficult to chew, and often genuinely dangerous. Raw meat carried parasites and bacteria capable of causing serious illness, sometimes fatal illness, with absolutely no way to kill those threats before eating. Disease spread easily. Wounds became infected easily, and without any reliable source of warmth, cold alone could kill just as effectively as any predator. Here's the sobering reality worth sitting with. Average human lifespans during this period were shockingly short, cut brutally short by infection, cold, starvation, and predation working together relentlessly. Humanity, for the vast majority of its early existence, was genuinely one of nature's more fragile creatures. Not the dominant species we consider ourselves today. Search life before fire, and anthropologists will tell you something remarkable. Nearly every single advantage that eventually made humans successful. Our big brains, our complex societies, our technology, none of it existed yet. We were simply another vulnerable species, struggling nightly against darkness and cold with nothing but our bare hands. Then, something happened that changed everything. Somewhere, on an ordinary day that nobody could have predicted, a force from the sky was about to hand humanity the single most important discovery in our entire species' history. Who was the very first human to actually touch fire? And what were they thinking in that exact moment? We'll never know their name, but we know exactly what created the opportunity: lightning, striking down from a violent storm, splitting an ancient tree and igniting it instantly. Or a volcano, erupting somewhere nearby, sending rivers of molten rock across the landscape, and setting everything flammable ablaze in its path. For most early humans, this remained a terrifying spectacle, something to flee from immediately. But somewhere, at some point, one individual reacted differently. Instead of running, they stayed. Instead of pure fear, genuine curiosity crept in alongside it. They watched the flame from a careful distance, noticing something remarkable. Unlike a predator, it never chased them. It simply burned, radiating warmth outward in every direction. Here's something genuinely surprising most people never consider. Fear and curiosity aren't opposites. They actually activate similar regions within the human brain. And throughout our entire evolutionary history, curiosity occasionally, carefully, won out over fear at exactly the right moments. This was one of those moments, and it may be the single most consequential curious decision any human being has ever made. That individual edged closer, feeling genuine warmth against their skin for the very first time, from a source they didn't have to physically create themselves. They extended a hand cautiously, testing the heat, pulling back sharply the moment it grew too intense. And then, driven by something we can only describe as raw determination, they reached toward a burning branch and lifted it. It burned. It genuinely hurt, and they held on anyway, understanding somehow, instinctively, that this pain was worth enduring for what they had just claimed. That single burning branch, carried carefully away from its natural source, represents the exact moment humanity stopped simply witnessing fire and started possessing it. But possessing fire and keeping it alive were two entirely different challenges. And the second one would prove considerably harder than anyone in that moment could have possibly imagined. How do you keep something alive that has absolutely no heartbeat, no lungs, and can be killed instantly by nothing more than a strong breeze or a few drops of rain. This was humanity's next genuinely enormous challenge, and solving it is where real civilization actually begins. Carrying a burning ember wasn't simply a matter of holding it. Early humans learned, often through repeated painful failure, to wrap embers carefully in bark, moss, or dried leaves, protecting the fragile glow from wind while still allowing enough air to keep it breathing, so to speak. A sudden gust could undo days of careful effort in seconds. Losing that ember often meant losing fire entirely, forcing a return to the darkness and cold everyone remembered all too well. Once a community successfully carried fire toward a new location, an entirely new responsibility emerged. Someone had to watch it, constantly, without exception. This is genuinely where the first organized human roles begin appearing. Someone was assigned, formally or informally, as firekeeper, responsible for feeding it, protecting it, and ensuring it never, under any circumstances, went out overnight. Communities built the first deliberate hearths around this responsibility, simple rings of stone designed specifically to contain the flame safely while concentrating its warmth efficiently. And here's something genuinely touching worth considering. This is very likely where the first true concept of family gathering actually originates. Not simply sharing space, but deliberately sitting together, facing the same warm center, sharing food, safety, and each other's company in a way no earlier human experience had ever quite offered. Search Origin of the Hearth today, and anthropologists consistently point toward this exact moment as genuinely foundational, the birthplace of shared domestic life itself. That firekeeper's careful, exhausting vigilance did something nobody in that moment could have possibly predicted. It was quietly, gradually, beginning to rewire the human brain itself. Did fire actually make humans smarter? This might be the single most fascinating question in this entire documentary, and the scientific answer is genuinely, remarkably, yes. Here's exactly how it happened. Raw food requires enormous amounts of chewing and digestive energy. Cooked food doesn't. When early humans began deliberately cooking meat over fire, they discovered something that changed biology itself. Cooked protein digests dramatically faster and delivers considerably more usable energy than raw meat ever could. That freed up energy, previously spent entirely on grinding and digesting tough raw food, suddenly had somewhere new to go. Anthropologists studying this exact period point toward something genuinely striking. Brain tissue is extraordinarily expensive to maintain, consuming enormous amounts of energy relative to its size. Once cooking freed up considerable metabolic resources, evolution had exactly what it needed to gradually favor larger, more energy-hungry brains across successive generations. Fire didn't just feed early humans. It may have quite literally fed human intelligence itself. But there's a second, equally significant piece to this puzzle. Firelight extended the productive day well beyond sunset. Suddenly, early humans had genuine free time in the evening. Time no longer spent hunting, foraging, or simply surviving in darkness. What did they do with it? They talked. They gestured. They told stories. Some researchers genuinely believe this extended evening social time around the fire directly accelerated the development of complex language itself. Search Cooking Hypothesis Human Evolution, and you'll find this exact theory actively debated and studied by serious anthropologists today, a genuinely compelling explanation for why human brains grew so dramatically larger compared toward our closest evolutionary relatives. Fire fed our bodies, fed our brains, and gave us the evening hours needed to actually talk to one another. And once humans could think this clearly and communicate this effectively, they were ready for something genuinely unprecedented, building the very first cities the world had ever seen. How did fire actually build the world's very first cities? Not through brute force or clever politics, but through something considerably more surprising. Fire transformed ordinary mud into something that could genuinely last. Ancient builders discovered that clay, shaped into bricks and fired within a hot kiln, hardened into something dramatically stronger, more durable, and considerably more weather-resistant than simple sun-dried mud alone. This wasn't a small improvement. It was the genuine difference between a temporary shelter and a permanent, lasting structure capable of housing generations of the same family. Fire did the same remarkable thing for clay pottery, transforming fragile, crumbling vessels into genuinely durable containers capable of storing water, grain, and food safely for the very first time. Suddenly, communities could stockpile surplus resources reliably, protected from spoilage and pests. That single capability, storing food safely, is directly connected toward humanity's ability to settle permanently in one place, rather than constantly wandering in search of fresh resources. Here's something genuinely unexpected worth knowing. Fire also produced lime, created by burning limestone at extreme temperatures, and this lime became essential mortar holding brick and stone structures together securely. Without fire-produced lime, many of the ancient world's most impressive early buildings simply couldn't have been constructed at all. Search history of fired brick today, and archaeologists will tell you cities like Uruk and Ur, among humanity's very first true urban centers, depended entirely on kiln technology, essentially large specialized fire chambers, to produce the considerable building materials their expanding populations genuinely required. Think about that for a moment. Pottery, brick, mortar, permanent housing, food storage, all of it traces directly back toward controlled fire. Cities weren't simply built near fire. In a very real, genuine sense, they were built entirely out of it. And once humans had cities, they needed something else entirely: the power to protect them, and eventually, the power to expand them into genuine empires. How did fire actually manufacture kings, empires, and the earliest superpowers in recorded history? The answer lies inside a furnace, where ordinary rock was transformed into something considerably more valuable than gold workable metal. It started with copper, extracted from raw ore through intense, controlled furnace heat. Copper tools and weapons were a genuine upgrade over stone, but copper alone remained relatively soft. Then came the breakthrough, combining molten copper with tin-created bronze, a considerably stronger, more durable alloy that would define an entire era of human history. Whoever controlled reliable bronze production controlled genuinely superior tools, superior weapons, and ultimately, superior armies. Here's something genuinely fascinating most people never realize: the entire Bronze Age collapsed, at least partially, because of supply chain problems. Tin was relatively rare, often requiring considerable long-distance trade, and when those trade routes broke down across the ancient Mediterranean around 3,000 years ago, entire bronze-dependent civilizations genuinely struggled to maintain their military and economic power. That crisis opened the door for iron. Considerably more abundant than tin, iron required even hotter furnace temperatures to work properly. But once mastered, it produced weapons and tools accessible to far more people than expensive bronze ever could. Armies equipped with iron weapons and armor could suddenly be raised at a scale bronze-dependent civilizations simply couldn't match. Search Bronze Age collapse today, and historians will tell you this single metallurgical transition helped reshape the entire ancient world's balance of power within merely a few generations. Empires that adapted quickly toward iron expanded. Those that didn't often fell behind considerably, sometimes catastrophically. Every sword, every shield, every piece of armor equipping ancient soldiers marching toward conquest passed through the exact same furnace fire first. Fire didn't just support these empires. In a very real sense, fire manufactured them, piece by piece, blade by blade. And soon, fire itself would stop being merely a tool for making weapons. It would become the weapon. What happens when fire stops shaping weapons and becomes one instead? In 672 CE, the Byzantine Empire found out, and the result terrified enemy nations for over 7 centuries straight. A refugee engineer named Kallinikos developed something the ancient world had genuinely never seen: a liquid incendiary weapon, sprayed from pressurized siphons mounted directly on warships. that burned so intensely it continued blazing even while floating on open water. Enemy sailors watching flames chase them across the ocean surface itself had absolutely no defense against it. The Byzantines called it simply their fire, and they guarded its exact formula so ferociously that the precise recipe genuinely died with their empire, remaining a mystery to this day. Centuries later, on the opposite side of the world, Chinese alchemists searching for an elixir of eternal life stumbled onto something considerably more explosive instead. Mixing sulfur, charcoal, and saltpeter together produced gunpowder, and the accidental discovery of an explosion where researchers expected immortality ranks among history's most consequential scientific accidents. Gunpowder spread steadily westward along trade routes, and European engineers seized upon it eagerly, developing cannons capable of demolishing fortress walls that had stood, seemingly impenetrable, for centuries. Castles that once represented ultimate military security suddenly became genuinely vulnerable. Warfare itself was permanently transformed. Search gunpowder history warfare today, and military historians consistently rank this single discovery among the most significant turning points in the entire history of organized human conflict. Firearms followed shortly after cannons, putting fire's explosive power directly into individual soldiers' hands for the very first time in human history. From Greek fire's mysterious ocean flames to gunpowder's earth-shaking explosions, fire had become something genuinely terrifying, a weapon capable of reshaping entire nations' fates within a single devastating battle. But fire wasn't finished transforming human history yet. Its next revolution wouldn't happen on any battlefield at all. It would happen inside a machine. How did fire actually become the engine driving the entire modern world? By burning coal to boil water, of all things, and discovering that the resulting steam pressure could be genuinely, remarkably harnessed. Early steam engines were crude and inefficient, but the fundamental principle proved genuinely revolutionary. Fire heats water, water becomes pressurized steam, and that steam pressure can physically push mechanical pistons with tremendous, reliable force. When engineer James Watt refined this design considerably, he didn't just improve a machine, he accidentally launched the Industrial Revolution. Suddenly, factories no longer needed to be built beside rushing rivers for water power. A coal-fired steam engine could be installed practically anywhere, and it could run mechanical looms, hammers, and pumps continuously, tirelessly, at a scale human or animal muscle power could never possibly match. Textile production that once required considerable time now happened dramatically faster, and manufacturing output exploded across industrializing nations. Then came the truly unexpected leap. Someone realized this same steam-generating principle could power a vehicle. Not just a stationary factory machine, the steam locomotive emerged, and suddenly humans could travel across entire countries at speeds that would have seemed genuinely impossible mere decades earlier. Search Industrial Revolution steam engine today, and economic historians will tell you this single technology fundamentally reshaped human civilization more rapidly and more completely than almost any previous invention in recorded history. Cities exploded in population. Global trade accelerated dramatically. The entire pace of human life itself changed permanently. Here's something genuinely worth sitting with. Every single one of these transformative machines, without exception, depended on the exact same basic action prehistoric humans once performed manually beside their very first campfire. Feed fire fuel, and it gives you power in return. That power was about to leave the factory floor entirely and quietly slip into something considerably more intimate, your own home. When did fire finally stop being something you had to physically maintain and start becoming something you could simply switch on? This quiet domestic revolution happened faster than most people realize, and it fundamentally changed everyday human life inside every single household. Gaslighting arrived first, piped directly into homes and lit with a simple match, replacing candles and oil lamps that required constant, tedious attention throughout every evening. Then gas stoves followed, offering instant, controllable cooking flame without the smoke, mess, and considerable labor of maintaining a traditional wood fire. For the first time in human history, an ordinary family could summon fire's benefits without actually tending fire itself. Then came something even more transformative: electricity, generated, ironically, by burning fuel to spin turbines somewhere considerably distant, then delivered invisibly through wires directly into homes. Electric heating and lighting meant families no longer needed any visible flame at all to access fire's fundamental benefits. Warmth and light delivered instantly, safely, at the simple flip of a switch. Here's something genuinely surprising worth considering even today. A considerable percentage of global electricity still comes from burning coal, oil, or natural gas somewhere within a distant power plant. That switch on your wall doesn't actually eliminate fire from the equation. It simply moves the flame somewhere you can no longer see it. Search history of home heating today, and you'll discover this transformation happened within barely a single century. Families moving from tending open hearths toward controlling invisible, centralized fire with remarkable, effortless convenience. Fire had entered every single home on Earth, quietly, invisibly, completely. But its next destination would be considerably more dramatic than any kitchen or living room. Fire was about to leave the planet entirely. Would you have ever guessed that the same discovery which once warmed a prehistoric cave eventually launched human beings toward the moon? It sounds almost unbelievable, but it's genuinely, precisely true. A rocket engine, at its absolute core, is simply controlled fire, an intense, carefully managed combustion reaction generating tremendous thrust in a specific, deliberate direction. Physicist Robert Goddard proved this basic principle worked in 1926, launching a small experimental rocket a modest distance across a Massachusetts field. It wasn't impressive to watch, but it was, quite literally, humanity's very first step toward space. Engineers spent the following decades refining this exact same fundamental principle, building increasingly powerful engines capable of generating considerably more thrust from considerably more fuel. By 1969, NASA's Saturn V rocket, the most powerful machine humans had ever built, ignited beneath the Apollo spacecraft, and controlled combustion generated enough force to physically launch human beings completely beyond Earth's gravity. Here's the detail that should genuinely astonish you. The fuel burning beneath that rocket wasn't conceptually different from the fuel burning inside your car's engine or your kitchen stove. It was simply combustion, precisely engineered, precisely controlled, scaled up to a genuinely unbelievable degree. The same chemical reaction humanity discovered accidentally near a lightning-struck tree eventually carried astronauts safely to the lunar surface and back. Search "How do rocket engines work today?" and you'll find the explanation always circles back toward the exact same basic combustion principle. Fuel plus oxidizer plus ignition equals controlled fire, controlled thrust, controlled flight. From a single carried ember to footprints on the moon, fire's journey had become genuinely unbelievable. But back here on Earth, fire hadn't finished testing humanity's limits. Some of history's fiercest battles against fire were still waiting to unfold. If fire built our civilization, why does humanity still spend enormous resources fighting it? Because the exact same force that warms and powers us can, without any warning, turn genuinely catastrophic. And history offers no shortage of devastating proof. In 1666, the Great Fire of London tore through the densely packed medieval city for 4 straight days, destroying thousands of wooden buildings and forcing an entire capital to fundamentally rethink how cities should be constructed. Just over 2 centuries later, in 1871, the Great Chicago Fire consumed several square miles of the rapidly growing American city, reportedly beginning, according to popular legend, in a single barn. These devastating disasters gave rise to something genuinely essential: organized, professional firefighting. What began as scattered volunteer bucket brigades gradually evolved into highly trained, remarkably well-equipped professional departments. Using specialized equipment and rigorous training to accomplish something early humans could never have imagined: fighting fire directly and often winning. California's story adds an entirely modern dimension to this ongoing battle. Increasingly severe wildfire seasons, driven partly by changing climate patterns, now demand satellite monitoring, coordinated aircraft deployment, and increasingly sophisticated firefighting technology just to keep pace with fires that can spread across considerable distances within mere hours. Search History of Firefighting today, and you'll discover this profession represents one of humanity's most direct, ongoing relationships with fire, neither fully conquering it nor abandoning it, but learning instead to respect its genuine, considerable power while managing it as responsibly and effectively as humanly possible. Every firefighter running toward danger while everyone else runs away represents something genuinely profound: humanity's entire complicated relationship with fire, condensed into a single, courageous act of professional bravery. And as fire's story approaches its conclusion, one final question remains genuinely worth asking. What does fire's future actually look like? Could humanity actually be approaching the end of fire's reign, after nearly 1 million years of complete dependence on it? Scientists working on nuclear fusion genuinely believe we might be, and what they're attempting to build inside their laboratories sounds almost like science fiction. Fusion reactors work by recreating the exact same fundamental process powering our own sun, forcing hydrogen atoms together under extreme heat and pressure until they fuse, releasing tremendous amounts of energy in the process. This isn't combustion in any traditional sense. It's an entirely different physical process, working at the atomic level itself, potentially offering humanity abundant, remarkably clean energy without burning anything whatsoever. Inside these reactors, matter exists in a genuinely exotic fourth state called plasma, superheated beyond anything ordinary fire ever reaches, where electrons separate completely from their atoms. Researchers have already achieved historic milestones, sustained reactions that generate measurably more energy than they consume, a threshold many scientists once doubted humanity would reach within our own lifetimes. So will fire actually disappear? Search Will Fusion Replace Fossil Fuels today, and honestly, most energy experts remain genuinely cautious. Steel production, certain industrial processes, and yes, your own kitchen stove, likely still depend on traditional combustion for considerable time to come. Fire's reign may be gradually declining, but it isn't ending anytime particularly soon. And maybe that's exactly the point worth remembering. 1 million years ago, a primitive human sat before the very first flame in recorded history, terrified, curious, and forever changed by what they had discovered. Today, we still depend on that exact same discovery, whether it's flickering quietly in a small kitchen or roaring beneath a rocket bound directly for space. And that, more than anything else in this entire documentary, is fire's real secret.